All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the C Show. I got Larry the Lawyer here with me tonight, and we're going to discuss one of the all-time great presidential races, the race of 1912. Larry, how are you tonight?
Doing fine, thanks, Chris. And you?
Hey, man, I can't complain. Power's on and the house taxes are paid, so I'm good for another month.
Yeah, 1912 is a very interesting year to have an election because, first of all, in April, the Titanic went down. And also, for you baseball fans, it's the year Fenway Park opened in Boston.
Uh, that is true. Seems like something else, some other event happened in 1912, but that's neither here nor there. So, going into this thing, it looks like that the economy seemed to be okay.
Yep.
But early on in the in the Taft administration, there seemed to be a shift, a schism. The the wealthier people started to have more influence. Um, Taft. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that unlike today, where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have their own, basically, half a political spectrum each. In those days, both the Democrats and the Republicans had the full spectrum from conservative to liberal or conservative to even radical in the parties. And when the Republican Party split, it split on the line of the property classes as opposed to the laboring and farm worker classes. So
And
basically,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
It seems the first schism started over this. Where did I write it down at? It was a bill that was passed in 1909, and I can't believe I had that wrote down. What did I do with that? Uh,
You're talking about the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act?
yes. My bad.
The interesting thing is, again, Taft is in favor of the protective tariff, the higher tariff to protect American goods, while Roosevelt believes that the tariff should be lowered to help the American consumers. Now, tariffs have not been lowered. Hang on, I have this information. Tariffs have not been lowered since 1857. Every tariff that has been in has been a higher tariff.
Wow.
The Democrats and Wilson want to lower the tariff, as does Theodore Roosevelt. They believe that it would be better for the lower classes, the working classes, to be able to compete and purchase both European goods and American goods. So it's basically as we discussed in the last election, the 1880 election that we did last time. It was the same thing as the issue between Garfield and Hancock. where Garfield wanted a high protective tariff for the Republicans, and Hancock wanted a economical tariff, which would be based on looking at certain items to be under a tariff or certain items not to be under a tariff or be to a lesser tariff. So this is the same thing we have again in 1912, 32 years later, and we're still looking at tariffs and their effect on the American populace.
Well, it seems like as we go into 1910, the schism even gets wider because of this act. The Republicans lost 32 seats in the House. Was there any type of leadership in the Republican Party that got these two side sections together and said, "Hey, we've got to work something out, or we're going to lose this next race"?
No, that was the whole issue, because a lot of people wanted Teddy Roosevelt to declare for the presidency at this point, but Teddy Roosevelt wouldn't. He had a personal relationship with Taft and a good feeling about Taft, and it took him until really almost early in 1912 to actually decide to actually bolt the party and start his own party. Up to that point, he was thinking that the Republican Party would consolidate around each other and would be able to beat the Democrats with a solid northern vote and losing the South. And that's what everything looked like. And when we actually get to the election, we'll see that if the Republican Party hadn't split along property class, laboring and farming class lines, they would have been able to beat the Democrats.
Not only would they have beat him, they would have been as one-sided as it gets.
Well, not so much, because you did have the solid South. But yeah, if you look at the voting, the popular vote, Wilson and the Democrats got 41.84% of the popular vote, while Roosevelt got 27.40, Taft got 23.17. So the Republicans had approximately an 8-point lead over Wilson if they would have stayed together.
I mean, I was looking at states like just glanced a while ago. I looked at Idaho, and in Idaho, there was like, I can't give you the exact vote count, but it was like 336,000 to 335,000 to 332,000.
Yeah.
And you're looking at 1,000 votes, 660,000 people voted against him.
Yeah, I mean, Wilson took states where he won 40% of the vote. He won 45% of the vote. But in every major northern state, if the Republican Party had banded together and kept the vote total, the Republicans would have taken those states. I want to look at three interesting states were California, Arizona, and Oklahoma. In California, Teddy Roosevelt won California with 41.83 of the votes, where Wilson had 41.81 of the votes. Taft, who didn't campaign in California at all, had 0.58% of the votes. And Debs, the socialist candidate, had a whopping 11.68% of the votes.
Wow.
Now you look at Arizona, you find that Wilson had 43.52, Teddy Roosevelt had 29.29, Taft had 12.74, so it was slightly below, but Debs again even had a higher percentage in Arizona than California. He had 13.33. And then we go into Oklahoma, where Debs had his highest vote total, 16.42. Wilson had 46.95. Teddy Roosevelt wasn't on the ballot and had 0%, and Taft had 35.77%. So, I mean, those were just three interesting states, but from the periphery. I mean, Oklahoma is now a solid southern state. Arizona, we probably consider purple at this point. California is definitely probably one of the bluest of the blue states. But in those days,
For a second.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Sorry, I was just gonna cut you out there for a second. I just never thought the home of Goldwater would end up being a purple state.
Yeah. Well, the home of Goldwater would have been a fairly liberal state before Goldwater. So
We'll keep going a second. My friend's sister, she's a big Democrat, and she said they called Arizona the Alabama of the West. Okay. But anyway, so in these conventions here, and I'm looking at many things here, and it seems like how much parties have changed. Seemed like what was Taft was supported unions. Is that correct?
no, Taft really didn't support unions. Roosevelt supported unions. Taft supported the proprietary class, so he would have been supporting the employers for the most part.
It's not. He was. Maybe I wrote it down wrong, but he was not anti-union. Is what that people would think a Republican was, but I could have wrote this down wrong. So don't hold me to.
I mean, he wasn't anti-union so much as pro-employment. The issue with unions, and it's hard because you're discussing a time of collectivization. All three major parties, and I'm calling the Bull Moose Progressives a major party at this point because they ended up in second place. All three of the parties were looking at Americans to be individuals and not collectives, meaning we're talking about a time when labor is very radicalized from the anarchist and the socialist persuasions. The anarchists in this point believe that all government should be taken down, but not that there should be no government. A new equal government of all people should be put into place. So it's almost the communists. The socialists believe in a radicalization of the workforce and agricultural, but the socialists in this scenario were not worldwide socialists. They believed in the nation state. We'll skip 2 years forward to World War I. We find both the French socialists and the German socialists, who you would think would not vote for war credits and have a combination of the working man, both vote for their national war credits. Italy was slightly different. And though Italy started out as an ally of Germany, the the Italian Socialist Party was very strong and was able to have Italy as a neutral nation until 1915 when it went over to the Allies. So, I mean, this is not your doctrinaire socialism. It's, I don't want to use the term National Socialism because that's the Nazis, that's what the Nazis called themselves, the NSDAP. But this is what you got, socialism based on your nation state.
What I found interesting is how Roosevelt was pushing for an 8-hour work week and protection of children and females, but Taft left out males.
Correct.
I guess he thought they should just work them to death. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff isn't too far off. Now, one thing I did find interesting, and I don't know if this was a way to pack the courts, which I'm dead set against, because, if you get a state that's, all blue or a state that's all red, then you're going to get, only one side of judges. But they wanted the direct election of federal as well as state judges.
Correct. And some states do have the direct election of judges. I know for a fact that New York has direct election of judges, but Connecticut does not.
Well, we have Alabama has direct election of judges, and that's fine on that. But I'm against having a federal election for judges.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's at this point there's no issue there because neither of the major parties have favored that position for many years.
Could you imagine the money that would be pumped in from the special interest groups to judges?
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
And that's just something we don't need, is for judges to be bought and paid for by lobbyists and stuff like that. I'm sorry, I got us off track a little bit.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. It is one of the worst possible issues.
So going in, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that also TR wanted recall elections, law passed by referendum also, and initiative, which is petition and enaction by popular vote, and as you said, judicial referendum. But even more so, he wanted a judicial referendum where if a court declared a law unconstitutional, the citizens could override it by a popular vote. So basically, he wanted to gut our system of checks and balances.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's pretty talk about progressive.
Yeah, big time. I mean, he also supported women's suffrage. At that point, he wanted direct election of senators, which hadn't been the case yet, and he wanted primary elections for all state and federal nominations.
He won 9 primaries to Lafayette's 2, and I believe Taft's 2.
Foss won 2, who was the governor of Massachusetts. Taft won 2, and Roosevelt won 9 of the actual primaries. In fact, Roosevelt won Ohio, and Taft, but Roosevelt lost New York, but not to Taft. He lost it to Foss.
Yeah, I see where he lost his home state.
Now, the interesting thing is that in the Republican convention, Taft took the South. the Southern Republicans, both blacks and whites, went overwhelmingly in support of Taft. There were
Still could vote at that time. I thought Jim Crow may have taken it back
well,
over.
it was getting there, and it was getting more and more. But even in the very worst of Jim Crow, some blacks were still able to vote, and some of the more liberal districts, whatever. Excuse me. So that was the issue. That was one of the issues because Teddy Roosevelt complained that Taft stole the convention because he's saying there are over a quarter of the votes in the convention were from Southern Republicans. And since 1880, the Republicans are not winning any of the Southern states nationally. So basically, Taft had a free ride of a quarter of the Republicans going into the convention. Teddy Roosevelt was winning all the popular primaries, or as it said, 9 out of 13. But when the Republican Party in all the states that didn't have primaries was having caucuses and picking delegates, when they went to the primary itself, Taft beat Roosevelt by under 100 votes. In fact, Taft actually had exactly 100 more than Roosevelt, but there were two. Taft had 566, TR had 466. La Follette, from Wisconsin, the progressive from Wisconsin, had 36, and Cummings had 10. So there was no issue about Taft winning the Republican convention, and that was at that time Roosevelt again claiming that the party nomination was stolen for him. That's when Roosevelt went in to form the Progressive Party of the United States, and calling it obviously the Bull Moose Party, and went on his new nationalism. Now, with all these marvelous platform issues that Roosevelt's fighting for progressively, there was no nomination process in the Bull Moose Convention. Roosevelt was the only one allowed to run, and he picked Governor Hiram Johnson from California as his running mate.
There was something I read that said this was the first time since 1884 something had happened, and I can't remember what it was.
Well, it was the first time that it was the last time that a non-major party finished second in the balloting. It hasn't happened since.
That's probably yeah. So,
Yeah.
So one of our tests about Roosevelt was, for 8-hour work day. He was for lower tariffs.
Yeah.
As opposed to Taft wanting higher tariffs.
Right. And Wilson was also in favor of lower tariffs.
All right. Roosevelt was also far ahead of his time on social issues, wanting to get women included.
Yeah, he wanted the social sphere was really everything we have today. National health, other than he wanted a national health service, which we don't have today.
He said he wanted a social security or a social something. Was that supposed to?
He called it social insurance to provide for the elderly, the unemployed, and the disabled.
So he wanted a basically like a Medicare or Medicaid like we have today.
Basically, except he wanted everyone included, a full national health service.
So he was the first one who started pushing for national health insurance 100 and plus years ago.
Correct. As you said, he also wanted a minimum wage law for women, an 8-hour workday. He wanted a federal securities commission. He wanted farm relief. He wanted workers' compensation for work-related injuries. He did want an inheritance tax. He figured that way the government could get money from the rich taxpayers. And he also wanted a constitutional amendment to allow a federal income tax. If you remember, Lincoln imposed a federal income tax during the Civil War, but it was determined by the Supreme Court that it was unconstitutional because it didn't follow the taxation provisions of the original Constitution.
Wow, Larry, this guy's so far ahead of his time, man.
Oh yeah, and as you know, he was major league into conservation. When he was president, he basically started the National Park Service, or actually he didn't start it because the first national park was Yellowstone, which was started in the 1800s, late 1800s, right around the time of the Nez Perce Wars. But he expanded it greatly. He was into he was into conservation issues, especially water and nature conservation. So I mean, yeah, he was a man ahead of his time. It would have been interesting because one of the proposals that Taft made to Roosevelt was that they pick a compromise candidate so they don't pull the Republican Party apart. Taft recommended Governor Headley, but Roosevelt would not accept a compromise. And Roosevelt did not suggest anyone else we would accept as a compromise candidate. So basically, you had the Republican Party fracturing along economic lines. And then so they're out there and they're really fractionated. And then you have the Democratic convention. Would you like to talk about that, Chris?
I always wanted to go into that, yes. Most definitely, because Roosevelt, Wilson trailed on number third the whole way through.
That's correct. Until the, and I'll tell you exactly which ballot. I have it written down here somewhere.
Bryan pulled his support.
Yeah.
William James Bryan pulled his support.
The 29th ballot.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but Ryan pulled his support, and I forgot what reason he pulled it for now.
Okay. Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Champ Clark, who was
Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Make sure you throw some love for my Alabama boy who was running.
Oh, yes, I have. Alabama was Underwood.
Yeah.
Champ Clark was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And he was leading through all of the ballots up until about the 29th, when he decided that he was going to accept an alliance with the Tammany Hall Democrats from New York City.
That's it.
And they were basically, they were a combine or an organization that believed in patronage. They wanted various things from Clark, and Clark agreed to it, and so that they were not. Clark was a sort of progressive, but he wasn't progressive enough for William Jennings Bryan to nominate him. Now, if you look at the 46 ballots, you'll see that William Jennings Bryan himself was only getting 1, 2, or 0 ballots all the way, but he was the leading Democrat, and many of the other Democrats were either favorite sons, governor from Hawaii, I'm sorry, the governor from Ohio, Foss, the governor from Massachusetts, Underwood from Alabama. They were holders. They knew that they weren't going to be able to beat Champ Clark, and the only way that they were going to win is if Bryan came out in favor of them. Now, Bryant decided that he was going to come out in favor of the moderate, other than on racial issues, Woodrow Wilson, which was interesting because Wilson, though he never did it, decided that he was going to release his delegates with no recommendation. If he had done that two ballots before, he would never have been the nominee.
Right, I read about like 1 or 2 votes before he was about to release his delegates. And
correct. So
and,
now the other major difference between the Democratic nomination and the Republican nomination is the Democrats were going on a super majority. You needed 2/3 of the ballot. So you figured when somebody would get a majority, everybody would fall in line, but that might or might not necessarily have happened. Wilson only really started getting votes in like the 43rd or the 43rd ballot. He started making a move, and he won on the 46th ballot. And then we had, he offered Clark, who finished second, of the vice presidency, but Clark refused, and he ordered Bryan the vice presidency. Bryan considered it, but he thought that he became vice president, he would undermine Wilson. So he ended up refusing, and Wilson picked Marshall, the Thomas Marshall, the Indiana governor, to be his vice president. Now, Wilson was not a progressive on race. He was a Southerner, though.
he was a racist.
Pardon?
He was a hardcore racist.
Yes, he was. He was a Southerner, but he moved to New Jersey. He became governor of New Jersey. He wanted tariff reform. He wanted business reform, and he wanted farm reform and banking reform. And those were his major planks on his program. And though we briefly mentioned after he was elected president, he was able to pass the Underwood Tariff Act, which reduced tariffs for the first time since 1857. He also was able to put in a Fair Trade Commission. He was able to work the Clayton Antitrust Act, which further reduced trust and monopolies, which was one of the major issues between Taft and Roosevelt. And he put through 2 banking reform acts, One, to create the Federal Reserve System, which is still in a lot around today, and monitoring our money. And a very important one was the Federal Farm Labor Act. I'm sorry, the Federal Farm Loan Act, where the small farmer would be able to borrow money to buy equipment and seeds, so he could have a chance to compete against the large farm, but more important, to subsist. Normally, the crop cycle of an American farmer was, in a good year, you brought in your crops and you paid off your loans and you tried to plan ahead for the next bad year. And unfortunately, it would come fairly soon. You didn't, you're dealing with the weather and climate and water, rain, and everything else. So you had to stow away whatever you could for the bad years. And Wilson made it much easier for the small farmer to receive federal loans to tide him over in the bad years. So to say between Roosevelt and Taft, Wilson really staked out a middle ground. He's not the liberal Democrat of today, but he does want the people, the individuals. Again, as I stated earlier, the term collectivization was a bad bugword for both Republicans and Democrats because of what was going on in the labor movement.
He would have been a Democrat in the 60s and 70s.
Yes, Wilson could have been a Wallace Southern Democrat.
I'm sorry, I got messed up. I meant Roosevelt.
Yes, but Teddy Roosevelt, yes, would be a liberal Democrat. But if you look at England, and we're going to jump overseas, the Conservative and the Liberal Party probably would have been switched in America. The British Conservative Party was probably more American liberal than the British Liberal Party at that time, or the American liberal wing at that time. So a liberal today would not be a liberal in 1912. A liberal today probably wouldn't even be a liberal in 1960.
Oh, a liberal today would be almost, the parties have changed so much. I was talking to a friend the other night. Ronald Reagan could not win the Republican nomination today.
Probably not.
No, absolutely. Give you another prime example. Do you think Bob Dole could win the Republican nomination today?
No, not at all.
George H.W. Bush?
Probably not.
No, none of those guys could.
Certainly Romney and McCain couldn't either.
How they won it to begin with. I'll tell you who else who couldn't have won it on the campaign that he run. George W. Bush couldn't have ran it with his compassionate conservative. He could have won the Republican nomination today. The Republicans have went so far to the right.
Yeah, that's right. That's the whole issue. The Republicans have lost basically their middle. The Democrats, today's Democrats, still have a middle ground. They don't have any right wing anymore, unless you consider the Manchin from West Virginia and the senator. What's her? Samana is her name, from Arizona. Other than that, there's really no right wings.
I don't consider Manchin. Here's what I consider Manchin. I consider him one of them old South Southern Democrats.
I would agree.
Manchin's not liberal.
Nope.
He is moderate to conservative, and he's somebody that he can relate with. And I made a video the other night. He is the most powerful man in America. If you want a bill to get passed, the road goes through West Virginia.
That's correct.
What he's doing, and he's playing both ends to the middle. All right, so let's get to the fall race. So we're going into the fall race now. Now the Republicans are already behind the 8 ball. Now, Roosevelt, Taft doesn't campaign. I guess Taft knows he's done. He stays in the Rose Garden.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, even though he doesn't campaign, he's still only a little under 4 percentage points beneath Roosevelt. He carries, without campaigning, 23.17% of the vote. Only 2 states, 8 electoral votes, but he still carries 23.17%, just as the sitting president. Roosevelt carries 27.4% of the vote. So if you add them together, you've got 57 points of the vote, and yet they only between them have 96 electoral votes. Roosevelt carried 6 states, carried Michigan, Minnesota, South Dakota, Pennsylvania, California, which actually split their electoral votes, 11 for Roosevelt and 2 for Wilson, and Washington.
Well, why don't a conversation go like this now? I mean, look, neither one of us are going to get the majority to win. Let's team up and go after him hell for leather and make this as dirty as possible and try to decipher off enough votes as we can, and one of us will win the race.
Well, I know, obviously it never happened, so we don't know if it would have worked or not, but Taft was willing to propose a compromise candidate so the Republicans would not split and probably would have been able to beat Wilson. I mean, most of the Republican Party.
You're Roosevelt's campaign manager. You're coming out of this and you're looking at this. What are you going to do? What's your strategy?
As well as Roosevelt's campaign manager, I'm going to do exactly what he did. Roosevelt is a popular ex-president. Roosevelt, and as his campaign manager, without polling and without knowing what's going on in the country, it's my opinion that Roosevelt can beat both Taft and Wilson, or Taft and whoever the Democrats put up. That's what I think. I think Roosevelt is that popular, and I'm going to be wrong, just like Roosevelt's campaign manager and Roosevelt was wrong. He didn't realize that Taft could hold that many of the Republican Party votes, including many, many progressives, by doing absolutely nothing. The Republican Party, they both knew, had more members and were getting higher vote totals year after year after year. In fact, Wilson became only the second Democrat to win an election, though Cleveland won 2 elections, since the Civil War, since before the Civil War.
1884, that's the one I was thinking of. All right, here's what I'm his strategist. I'm going back and I'm looking at the states we won last time.
Okay.
I'm looking at how I performed and how I did that. I'm going to focus on these 12 to 15 states that I performed well in, and I'm going to stay in those states. And I'm going to pound away and pound away and pound away and pound away and pound away. And I'm going to hammer away at, Wilson. And I'm not going to pay attention to Taft. I'm just going to hammer away. And in those 15 states, I'm just going to keep hammering and hammering and hammering. During that time, I'm also going to take the fight to his turf. And I'm going to point out, hey, is this what you want? Is this what you trust your American with? You going to trust an elitist from Princeton University?
Well,
huh?
I said, obviously, as I said, you know, we don't know what would have happened if that had happened. I look at the country, and what I see is too many people don't want to change. Too many people were satisfied with Taft as the Republican nominee. Too many people were satisfied with Taft as the president. I mean, Taft had a judicial background. Taft was Governor General of the Philippine Islands for a while. Taft was Roosevelt's Secretary of War, and Taft was a friend of Roosevelt's, who Roosevelt supported for the president. They never acrimoniously broke. They broke along economic lines. Roosevelt did not insult Taft, and he really didn't insult Wilson. That wasn't the way he ran his campaigns. He could have, maybe he should have, but he didn't. If you look back at the 1800s, you find really dirty campaigns. This one was not one of them. Taft, realizing he wasn't going to win, did nothing. I mean, Taft, on the other hand, if Taft would come out directly and say, I'm not going to win, I think you should support Roosevelt and the Progressive Party, he might have been able to throw the race to Roosevelt that way too. Wilson was going to have the solid South. Wilson was the first candidate to make major inroads into the North, and he only was able to do it because of the split between Roosevelt and Taft.
That's it. And that's what it all comes down to. I mean,
yeah, I mean, if you look at the state ballots, the northern states, the states that Wilson carried, every single one of them, maybe not every single one, but the vast majority of them, if you add up Taft and Roosevelt's vote, they beat Wilson.
I mean, it would have been a landslide.
No, it wouldn't have been a landslide, but because they're probably they would have taken. Technically, Wilson wanted a landslide without even capturing 42% of the vote.
That's true. Well, I think we've covered about everything here tonight, Larry. Is there anything else you want to add?
Just that, at least in the recent history of the United States, third parties don't win.
That is true.
But they might cost someone else the victory. And this is the way he shows it.
Let's do an episode about that, because there's some races that I want to cover. There's some myths about people who cost races, but let's go ahead and close this out, and we'll talk about that for a second.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to add, Larry? If not, close this
No,
out.
I'm okay. I thought this was a very enjoyable race to cover because the national interests were economic, and
Much.
and because labor is now coming into force in both the North and the South. Now the South always had a coal industry. Birmingham, of course, being the Pennsylvania of the South.
Yeah.
And they're now starting to industrialize. They're getting larger cities, and that's important because we're going to be going from an agrarian economy to a labor-backed economy, and then to a service-oriented economy in a little over 100 years.
That's very true. And we'll go through those as we go. But
Yeah.
Larry, it was great having you, man, and we'll have you back on very soon.
Thank you very much.